All right, fifth grade, we were learning about Georgia O'Keeffe, and in this lesson, we are going to use her Petunias from 1924 and her Petunias in 1925 paintings as the inspiration. So to begin, we're going to start with a circle, somewhat in the middle. And then I'm going to start to draw these organic, kind of free-flowing lines coming out. So, come up this way. And I kind of loop it and bring it back and connect it to that center. The petunias are very similar to her pansy paintings, and the flowers have a very similar feel to them. It's going to have a little fold in it. All right, so I'm going to do something along these lines. Now, once I have the drawing, it's time to paint. We're going to be working with purple. So I want to think about the center as my starting point, and I want my brush strokes to either go outwards or come inwards towards this circle. Our lines are going to kind of disappear because we're going to paint this whole thing with purple, and then we're going to come back and we're going to add details into it, creating some various highlights and shadows using oil pastels when this is dry. And so again, I want my brush strokes to come towards the center of my petals. That's going to create a natural texture within the flower, and it will add some good interest into our picture. Okay, so at this point, you're going to want to put your flowers aside to dry. And then once they are dry, we will move into the second step. Second step is going to be working with these oil pastels. So you should have seen these in your take-home bags in the classroom. You will have access to these. But we're going to work with these Portfolio Series oil pastels. And what I like about them is by adding water, we can kind of spread and mix them into our paint. So I have one dry already. Looking at an example of O'Keeffe's Petunias, we see that the lines in here were a darker line, almost an outline around them, but then they were very light around the edges. So I'm just going to pick a petal, and I'm going to come in and start to create highlights. Highlights are when we add white to a color. And I can come in lighter and have them fade. And so I'm just working with those edges of my petals. With that thicker outline, and then slightly lighter coming in, following the shape of those petals. All right, once I have gone in and done some of my highlights, I can come back in and I can work with some shadows. So anywhere where it dips and kind of folds, we're going to add some shadows. Where things are overlapping and whatnot, we can come in. So this is kind of that dip idea. So I'm going to come in and I'm just recreating that curve, and as I do, I make it smaller and smaller until it ends. And so this is just going to give some of that movement into our pictures and into our flowers. All right, and then sometimes there's some veining within them, so we can kind of just extend this down. Add a few lines. Again, this is kind of that texture and that motion that we were creating with our paintbrush. We're going to just emphasize it a little bit more with the oil pastel. All right, so it's starting to take life on. It's starting to have some movement, but we don't want it to be such a harsh contrast. So I am going to work with my brush and water. That's all I need. And as I come in here, do you see how that oil pastel starts to soften, starts to look very paint-like? I love these. And it's just with water. And I can get all of this to soften, to blend. And to begin to look a little bit more natural. You do too much water or too many brush strokes, if you're pressing really hard, then you might start to remove the paint. So you want to be very careful. And I'm just working quickly and very light. I don't want to press into the flower. I don't want to tear anything. Trying to get this here. So as I'm doing this, I almost feel like I want to color the blue a little more solidly in these areas. That's still a little wet. I can also come back in to areas. I feel like I'm really lifting paint there, and I want to add a little bit more purple. So you should have purple left over from last week. You can always come back in and add on top and start to touch up any areas that you're not content with. The final area is the center of it, and the center in hers was really dark. So I'm just going to use my oil pastel directly in there. Filling that in with that nice dark blue. And then I want to come over with a little bit of purple. And as I start to kind of swirl those together, you can see this really nice blue violet in the middle as it starts to blend in. The final step in this is completing a background. So after I let this dry, I'm going to come back in with my watercolors. If you're at home and you do not have watercolors, you can also do this with markers, turning your markers into paint by coloring first with your marker and then adding water over the top. I like to do this directly with watercolors so that I can get a very abstract feel in the back. So I want to work with blues and greens. So I am going to drop water into there, getting these colors ready to go. And I want to do a wet on wet technique. And that is when we use water first on the paper. So I'm just gonna start to kind of add these droplets all over. I can spread them all around. Remember, if you get this part really wet, your purple paint might start to spread as well, so be careful around those edges. I like to work in small sections at a time so that the paper's not drying. Then I come in here and I am just dropping the colors right in to my paper. And because it is a wet on wet technique, it's gonna give us these different blues, different greens, blue greens,